Welcome back to the MOOC course on research writing. My name is Aradhana Malik and I am helping you with this course. And in this session, what we will talk, in the previous class we talked about drafting. So we talked about various things. We discussed these stages of drafting. We talked about how you can draft, how you can start writing an idea in your own words. And we discussed a number of stages. We talked about a thesis, a working thesis. We talked about selecting a critical stance, etc. Now, in this class, we will take that discussion forward and we will look at some more here. So, we talked about drafting guidelines. So, in this session, we are going to talk about the how you support your claim. So, various stages of supporting your claim and how you start drafting. And so, various steps for supporting your claim are: first, you need to understand what counts as an argument. You need to find out what your argument is, what are you trying to say, what are you trying to establish. Then, you need to formulate an argumentative thesis. We talked about a working thesis. You have to come up with a thesis that can possibly have an equally important opposing point of view that can be argued upon, that can have a balanced that can have another side to it, to put it in very simple words. Then you shape your appeal to the audience, and then you formulate good reasons to support your claim. You establish your credibility, you use logical appeals, you recognize the use and misuse of fallacies, and you cite sources in an argument, and then you organize the whole argument. So, let us see what each of these points are. The first step is checking whether an argument can actually be argued. Again, all this is from the book by Lunsford that I showed you in the previous class. The first part of this is that whatever you write should attempt to convince readers of something. Change their minds about something, or urge them either to do something or to explore a topic in order to make a wise decision. So, it should have an action oriented aspect to it. It should be persuasive enough for them to change their minds about whatever they have believed in so far, or it should convince them that they should do something about the topic or find out more about the topic in order to do something else. So, that is what an argumentative a good argument should have. Another thing it should have is that it should address a problem for which no easily acceptable solution exists, or ask a question to which no absolute answer exists. Okay, I am sorry, this word should be which. So, it should ask a question to which no absolute answer exists. It should present a position that readers might realistically have varying perspectives on. Okay. So, it should have it should give you an idea of something that readers might have divergent views on, which will in turn, if you are able to prove your or if you are able to convince the reader that despite the validity, despite the strength of what he or she believes in, what you are saying may also have equal or higher value, then this will be, then your argument will be more robust. So, it is very, very important. Then the next step is formulating an argumentative thesis. How do you formulate an argumentative thesis? To develop a claim that can become the working thesis for an argument, you often need to direct this kind of statement towards some action. That is, your claim needs to move from what is to what ought to be. So, this is how things are, and this is how something else should be. Taking the example that we discussed earlier, one example of an argumentative thesis is: researchers need to share the knowledge they have created with those who can use it. So, training in research is essential for them. So, that is a way of formulating an argumentative thesis. Researchers need to share the knowledge they have created with those who can use it. So, training in research writing is essential for them. Now, you are asking the readers to do something different from what they have actually been doing, and that is what an argumentative thesis will do. An example of this I shared with you yesterday. when I talked about the development of the research writing program at IIT Kharagpur, we have a compulsory subject called English for Technical Writing, and I told you the story of how it came to be yesterday. Some senior professors got together and realized that students are having difficulty sharing the knowledge they have created with others who can use it, and that in turn is affecting their credibility as researchers, especially when they compete with the best globally. So somebody found out what the problems were, why it was necessary to have such a program in place, and the authorities were convinced, and some people in position of authority also did their bit by finding out more about what kinds of problems researchers were facing. All that was put together, and then they decided on the basis of the evidence they saw that this program needs to be instituted. Researchers have to be taught how to write good research papers. So the argument was that researchers need to share, or research scholars need to share, the knowledge they have created with those who can use it, which is why the training in research writing became essential for them, and which is why this whole program of this subject was put in place. Okay, all right. You shape your appeal to your audience. How do you make the audience, the people who are reading your paper, believe in what you say? How do you do that? First, you establish common ground with your readers wherever possible. And how do you do that? You refer to, when we talk about literature review, in the literature review, you refer to past literature. So you refer to something that your readers may already have done in the past or read in the past. Okay. Then you show that you respect your audience's interests and views. So you take the argument to something that you believe that the audience may already know or may be able to use. You choose examples and other pieces of verbal and visual evidence that your audience will understand and relate to. You choose your language, style, and the level of formality most appropriate to your audience. So it's very, very important to write in a manner that the readers will be reading it. Now, when you start writing for journals, the one thing that you all must be very careful of is what they expect you to write. Some journals want their abstracts written as paragraphs. Others want them written in terms of, what your research question, what your research objective was, what were the methods, how did you conduct your research, what kind of a paper is it? Is it a concept paper? Is it a literature review? Is it an experimental paper? Is it a data-based paper? So all that will be asked of you. Now, the readers of that particular journal are used to reading things in a certain way. So you choose the method, the format, the language, the style appropriate to your audience, which means appropriate to the needs of that particular journal, or appropriate to the needs of the people who might be reading it. You cannot take an article that you would write for a magazine, and it will not be accepted by a journal. Why? Because in a journal they are looking for more in-depth information. Typically the readers are looking for information that they can replicate within their own context or in similar situations, information that they can use to build on more, to build more knowledge on. So that is what they are looking for. So their needs from what you present are very different. Then you formulate good reasons to support your claim. You give them reasons that establish credibility, you give them reasons that appeal to logic, and reasons that appeal to emotion. How do you do this? Establishing your credibility. You demonstrate knowledge. Tell the readers, convince the readers that you have read what you have read. I think I gave you this example earlier also. I was having a discussion with one of my research scholars, and she said that, ma'am, is it absolutely necessary that literature has to be referred to whenever we are presenting something, even if I am writing a proposal? And my answer was yes. How can you justify that a gap exists in the literature till you refer to literature that talks about similar things but does not talk about something that it should have talked about, or specifically mentions that there was no way that the particular researcher or the researcher was unable to identify or work in or do something that they had started out doing, and that portion would be covered in limitations. So various ways of finding gaps in literature. Okay, but this is not about research methods, it's about writing. So going into that will again take up more time. Anyway, So it is absolutely essential that you demonstrate your knowledge of whatever has been done in the past. Then you establish common ground. You refer to what you think that your readers may have known. Then you demonstrate fairness, and we'll deal with each of these things independently. Okay, how do you demonstrate knowledge? When you talk about demonstrating knowledge, you ask yourself, can you provide information about your topic from sources other than your own knowledge? What are the sources of your information? How reliable are your sources? Do any sources contradict one another? If so, can you account for or resolve the contradictions? If you have personal experience relating to the issue, would telling about this experience help support your claim? So can you really do, where are you getting this information from? Is the person believable or not? Do these sources, and if these sources contradict one another, that is even more essential. I was having another discussion with another one of my research scholars, and this scholar had put in a section in one of his papers that said contradictions in the literature. And that was so worthwhile. Now when we were going to, when we were in the process of reducing the word count or fitting the word count into the word count required by a journal, my student asked me, he said, ma'am, do you think we need to keep this section or can we take it out? And I said, this section must be there. We can take out a lot of other things, but this section is well written, and this section proves that you have looked at the contradictions in the literature. You have seen what opposes your point of view, and you have still tried to defend yourself despite having knowledge, despite proving that you know what is being said, that goes against you, or what has been, it's not being said, but it's about, what has proven to go against your pattern of belief. So that is what we are talking about. If the sources contradict one another and you present the contradictions in literature and still defend your point of view, that makes whatever you are saying much more robust, much more strong, much more credible, much more believable, because a person who is reading your paper and who is trying to take a decision on whether your paper should be published or not sees this part and says, yes, this person is not shooting arrows in thin air, or shooting arrows blindly. This person has actually gone through opposing views and still been able to defend his or her perspective and say, despite these opposing views, whatever I am saying makes sense, and here is why. So that's very, very important. Okay, if your sources contradict one another, you present that and you still weave a story around why your perspective needs to be believed. If so, can you account for or resolve the contradictions? And this is exactly what my student had done. So it's amazing, how you can do this. Okay, if you have personal experience relating to the issue, would telling about this experience help support your claim? Many times we have a tendency to say, I believe, in my opinion, this is what should be done, and it has been observed. We use words like these. Now when we use words like these, you must think as to whether your observation will really support your claim or not, and if it will, is it really strong enough to support your claim? Okay, so that is very, very critical as to what you include. Then how do you establish common ground? You find out what are the differing perspectives on this issue. What common ground can you find? You talk about the aspects of the issue on which all sides agree. So despite these opposing points of view, various authors are saying the same thing. One is saying, I was able to do this but not this. The second person is saying, yes, I believe this is true but not something else. The third person says, yes, I believe A is true but not something else. So one common point that different authors are saying, you establish common ground for whatever literature you are referring to, and you say, well, despite their differing viewpoints on several other aspects of the issue, these 2, 3, 4 researchers are agreeing on one aspect, and that is this. Then how can you express such common ground clearly to all sides? Okay, so you find out how you can, again, you can't get in touch with the authors, but you're assuming that readers will be keen on knowing what common ground has been established. So how do you express this common ground? How can you discover and consider opinions on this issue that differ from your own? Again, I told you about contradictions in literature. Now, when we start looking for literature, we have a tendency to look for literature that agrees with whatever it is that we are trying to say. So, we don't really actively look for literature that is not really along the, or that opposes what we are trying to say. However, it is very, very important that we say, okay, I believe in this. I started out with the belief that all researchers, all research scholars should be taught research writing, but literature points out that it's not training in research writing, it is actually practice in research writing that helps. So, it's not training. Maybe literature points out to that. Maybe literature says that instead of putting students through a class on research writing, it might help them more if they were to write research papers and get individual feedback from different teachers and collect all that feedback and then keep practicing writing papers. One, it will add to their resume, and two, it will help build their credibility, because after 2, 3, 4, 8, 10 rejections, their paper will get accepted. I don't know what the literature says. However, there is a very high chance that the literature might say something like this. Now, if you discover something like this in the literature that talks about both of these, and you still say that despite this, I firmly believe that training in research writing is very, very important for research scholars, because it at least gives them the initial push towards writing papers. A lot of people come for research who have never ever seen a research paper. So, in addition to this class, maybe that will also help, but you know, having this sort of a class for the first 2 or 3 or 4 months of their academic careers might help them. Now, when you present both points of view and still defend your point of view and say this is not a total waste, it is doing some good to people, your opinion will become more valuable. Why? Because you have considered an opinion that says no, research scholars need not be taught research writing, practice is more important. Okay. So, you discover, how have you discovered it? Then, how can you use language, occupational, regional or ethnic varieties of English or languages other than English to establish common ground with those you address? Language implying approval or disapproval, stereotypes, references to race, religion or gender, potentially sexist language. Very, very important. How do you use language? My PhD thesis was on media screen exposure, the impact of media screen exposure on the communicative competence of 4 to 6-year-old children. Now, I had to refer to children, at times I had to refer to individual children. When I was doing my masters, at that time, this whole concept of he, she or S/HE, he and she combined was not very, not really emphasized on. But by the time I reached my PhD program, and being in the West, people were a lot more aware, and this had become a critical issue. So, throughout my dissertation, I have referred to any child when I say, okay, the child does this, and instead of saying he, I say S/HE, she or he, her or his. So, you know, that is how you try to be as neutral in your language as possible. So, and again, we avoid references to race unless you are writing a paper on cultural anthropology, where highlighting the differences and the biases in the race become very important. So, if that context demands it, by all means, but it should be written with the sole purpose of educating people and not really enhancing or developing biases among your readers. Okay, so that is very, very important. Then, or language apply, all right. Then, demonstrating fairness. So, how do you demonstrate fairness? What are the differing perspectives on this issue? So, yeah, demonstrating fairness. How can you show that you are taking into account all the significant points of view? How can you demonstrate that you understand and sympathize with points of view other than your own? I have told you, considering opposing points of view, pointing out contradictions in literature, very, very important. What can you do to show that you have considered the evidence carefully, including evidence that does not support your position? So, you provide a well balanced overview of the whole situation. Okay. So, that is how you demonstrate fairness and establish common ground and demonstrate knowledge, and in turn establish your credibility. Now, we will take on this discussion further in the next class. Thank you very much for listening.